When Ethan broke up with me, he didn't just end the relationship. He tried to bury me with it. I can still hear his voice, low and full of contempt, echoing across the tiny living room of the apartment we used to share. "You'll never make it without me," he sneered, arms crossed over his chest like he was delivering some final, absolute truth. "You're too soft, too weak. You'll be stuck working some dead-end job, living in the same place forever, dreaming small because that's all you'll ever be." I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, blinking at him, feeling the weight of his words settle into my bones. It wasn't just a breakup. It was a condemnation. And the worst part, a small, broken part of me believed him. Because that's what years of slow, careful erosion does to you. He hadn't screamed or hit or thrown things. He just chipped away at me, day by day, until I was too small to remember who I used to be without him. When he finally packed his things and slammed the door behind him, the silence left behind was deafening. I remember sinking onto the couch, the one we had picked out together at that awful discount furniture store, and just sitting there. Staring at nothing. Feeling nothing. For a while, I stayed exactly where he had predicted. Frozen. Small. Terrified. But grief has a funny way of turning into something else if you let it. Anger. Determination. Hope. The tiniest spark of rebellion ignited inside me during those first lonely weeks. What if he was wrong? What if the small, scared girl he had left behind wasn't the only version of me there was? What if I could be more? It didn't happen overnight. God, no. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, still half convinced he was right about everything. But little by little, I started moving. I applied for jobs I didn't think I deserved. I took night classes, dragging myself to lectures after exhausting shifts at my soul-sucking temp job. I read books about leadership, communication, confidence, anything that could help me build a version of myself that Ethan would never recognize. The first time I got promoted, a small bump up to assistant manager at a marketing firm, I sat in my car in the parking garage and cried for 20 minutes. Not because it was some huge, glamorous title, but because it was mine. Not his. Not because of him. In spite of him. From there, everything snowballed. One promotion. Then another. Then a risky leap to a startup company that took a chance on me when I still felt like an imposter. I worked harder than I ever thought I could. Late nights. Early mornings. Weekend calls. Not because I needed to prove something to Ethan, not anymore, but because every step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of myself he had tried to destroy. By the time I was promoted to team lead at that startup, a company that was rapidly growing, carving out a serious name in the tech industry, I barely thought of him anymore. Ethan was a shadow, a bad memory, a cautionary tale. Until the day he showed up at my office. I almost didn't recognize him at first. He looked smaller somehow. Older. Tired. His hair was shorter. His suit didn't fit quite right. And when he said his name at the front desk, said it like he wasn't sure if it still carried any weight, I felt the world tilt slightly under my feet. He was here, interviewing for an open position. In my department. In a weird twist of fate, the startup had just merged with a smaller company that had gone under, and he had been one of the many casualties scrambling for a new job. And now he was standing here. Nudging me. He hadn't seen me yet. He was busy filling out paperwork, looking awkward and out of place under the sleek lights of the lobby. I stood there for a long moment just watching him. The man who had once told me I would never be anything without him. And now, he was about to work for me. A slow, steady smile spread across my face, not cruel, not vengeful, just sure. Because it wasn't about revenge. It was about becoming the woman he never believed I could be. And now he would have no choice but to see it. I don't know how I managed to keep my expression neutral when I finally walked into the conference room. Ethan was already sitting there, his hands folded tightly on the table, a nervous smile plastered across his face. He stood up quickly when he saw me, that same old instinct, that performative charm he used to wear like a second skin. But the second his eyes met mine, something flickered. Recognition. Jacques. Maybe even fear. He recovered quickly, forcing a half-laugh, like we were two old friends bumping into each other in a coffee shop instead of sitting across from each other in an interview I was leading. Wow, small world, he said, voice a little too loud, a little too eager. I smiled politely. Professional. Detached. Small world, I agreed smoothly, sliding into the chair across from him. For a second, he looked like he might try to steer the conversation into something personal. Maybe an apology. Maybe some awkward, half-hearted attempt at nostalgia. But I didn't give him the chance. I opened my notebook, clicked my pen once and said, "Let's get started, shall we?" Business. Only business. Because he didn't deserve my emotions. He didn't deserve my anger, my resentment, my triumph. He was just another candidate now. I asked him the same questions I asked every applicant. Walk me through your experience. What strengths do you bring to the team? How do you handle tight deadlines and shifting priorities? He stumbled a little at first, clearly thrown by the situation, but then he found his rhythm, answering in that smooth, confident tone he always used when he was selling something. Selling himself. It would have been almost impressive if I hadn't seen behind that mask once upon a time. If I hadn't known exactly how much of it was smoke and mirrors. I took notes, nodded politely, kept my face unreadable. But inside, I felt powerful in a way I hadn't even known was possible. Not because I had power over him, but because he had no power over me. Not anymore. When the interview ended, I stood up, offered him a handshake. He hesitated just a fraction of a second too long before taking it. His hand was clammy. Mine was steady. "Thank you for coming in," I said, professional to the very last word. "We'll be in touch after we complete the interview process." He nodded, that fake smile faltering for just a moment. And then he left. Just like that. No grand confrontation. No dramatic apology. No desperate begging. Just a man walking out of a room, smaller than the memory I had carried of him for so long. When the door clicked shut behind him, I sat back down and let out a slow breath. The room felt bigger without him in it. Brighter. Lighter. Later, when I met with the rest of the hearing panel, we discussed all the candidates objectively. And the truth was, Ethan wasn't the worst choice. He wasn't the best either. Mediocre, if I was being honest. Average. And it struck me then how perfectly fitting it was. For all the ways he had tried to tear me down, for all the certainty he had spoken with when he told me I'd never be anything without him. He was just another man fighting for a spot in a world I had already built without him. In the end, we hired him. Not because I wanted to punish him by putting him under my authority. Not because I wanted to prove a point. But because I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I had already won the only battle that mattered, the battle to become the version of myself he never believed could exist. When the offer letter went out and he accepted, a small part of me braced for awkwardness. But when he walked into his first team meeting, carrying his company-issued laptop and his fake smile, something inside me shifted permanently. He wasn't a threat. He wasn't a villain. He wasn't even a bad dream anymore. He was just a guy sitting 3 rows back, taking notes while I outlined the new strategy for the quarter. A footnote. Nothing more. And as I clicked through the slides explaining the vision for the future, a future I had carved out with my own hands, my own heart, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Please. Managing Ethan was interesting. Not hard exactly. Not dramatic either. Just strange, like stepping into an alternate reality where all the old rules had been rewritten, and I was finally the one holding the pen. He wasn't a bad employee. Not outstanding. Not a star. He showed up on time, turned in work that was fine but rarely exceptional, nodded in meetings, stayed quiet during feedback sessions. He played the part of the diligent team member, but it was clear he hated every second of answering to me. At first, I braced for a confrontation. Waited for him to crack. For some snide comment. Some smug reminder of who we used to be, who he used to think I was. But it never came. And slowly, I realized he wasn't being noble. He wasn't being respectful. He was embarrassed. Humiliated. Not just because of me, though, maybe especially because of me, but because he was trapped in a reality he had never prepared himself for. The reality where I wasn't the small, scared girl he left behind. The reality where I had built a world where he was just another name on the payroll. It would have been easy to lord it over him. To twist the knife. But I didn't. Not because I was some saint. But because I didn't need to. His discomfort wasn't my victory. My life was. Every time I sat at the head of the table, presenting strategies that moved the company forward. Every time I led team brainstorms where fresh ideas filled the room and my leadership wasn't just accepted but trusted. Every time someone came to me for advice, mentorship, vision. That was my win. It wasn't about him. It had never really been about him. And slowly, without even trying, he faded into the background of my life. There was one afternoon, though, about 3 months after he started, that stuck with me. I was leaving the office late after a particularly grueling day. The halls were mostly empty, just the low hum of computers and the soft shuffle of cleaning crews beginning their rounds. I stepped into the elevator, exhausted, shoulders aching. And there he was. Already inside, standing in the corner, looking down at his phone. For a second, we just stood there, two ghosts from a different lifetime, trapped together for a 30-second ride down to the lobby. He looked up when the doors closed. Our eyes met. For once, there was no performance. No smirk. No forced charm. Just a man who looked tired. And a woman who wasn't afraid of him anymore. He cleared his throat. "Congrats," he said quietly. I blinked, thrown off. On what? He shrugged one shoulder awkwardly. All of it. You made something real. You proved me wrong. The elevator dinged before I could respond. The doors slid open. And he walked out first, his head down, disappearing into the night. I stood there for a second longer, processing the moment. Not triumphantly. Not smugly. Just quietly. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't closure. It was just a tiny, broken acknowledgement of a truth too big for either of us to ignore anymore. I didn't need his validation. I didn't need his regret. I had already built everything he said I couldn't. And the best part, I hadn't built it to spite him. I had built it for me. That night, driving home, the city lights blurring past in streaks of gold and blue, I felt a peace settle over me that no victory dance could have ever delivered. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting free. Free of the hurt. Free of the doubts. Free of the version of yourself they tried so hard to trap you inside. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't scared anymore. I was just me. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. After that night in the elevator, something inside me shifted. It was subtle, not a loud, dramatic transformation, but real. Like a window finally opening after being stuck shut for too long. I didn't realize how much of my energy had still been tied to Ethan until that tie broke for good. I had spent so long quietly measuring myself against the ghost of who he said I was, chasing milestones, collecting wins like armor to prove him wrong. And now, I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I had outgrown him. Outgrown the tiny, cramped future he tried to trap me inside. And with that freedom came something I hadn't expected, real ambition. Not ambition fueled by anger or spite, but ambition born from a simple, steady belief that I deserved more. That I could do more. I threw myself into my work not because I needed validation, but because I loved it. I loved building something. I loved mentoring new hires, shaping fresh ideas, pushing my team toward goals that once seemed impossible. Our department started smashing records. Clients requested us specifically. Upper management took notice. One afternoon, my boss called me into his office, a floor-to-ceiling glass box overlooking the city skyline. I walked in feeling calm, sure. He smiled, that rare, real smile he only gave when something big was about to happen. "We're creating a new division," he said, sliding a file across the desk toward me, "and we want you to run it." I blinked, stunned. A division? My own team. My own vision. A seat at the table where real decisions were made. I picked up the file, my fingers trembling just slightly. "This isn't just a promotion," he added. "It's a new level. You'll have hearing power, budget control, your name on initiatives." For a split second, the old doubt tried to claw its way back in. "Are you sure you're good enough?" But it didn't get very far. Because I knew the answer now. "Yes." I smiled, feeling it bloom slow and steady from the inside out. "I'm ready," I said. And I meant it. When I walked back to my desk, the whole office buzzing around me, I caught a glimpse of Ethan across the room. Sitting in the middle of the open floor plan, hunched over his computer, blending into the background. We made eye contact just for a second. He must have known something had changed. Maybe he heard rumors already. Maybe he could just feel it in the air. I gave him a small, polite nod, the same one I would have given any other employee. Because that's all he was now. Not a villain. Not a ghost. Just a footnote. A reminder of who I had been and who I would never be again. When the news went public a few days later, the internal email announcement with my new title shining at the top, people flooded my inbox with congratulations. Even Ethan sent a short, awkward email. "Congrats, well deserved." I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty. But because the story between us had finally, completely, ended. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I focused on building the future I had fought for. I spent late nights brainstorming new strategies, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I hired people who reminded me of myself, scrappy, smart, a little rough around the edges but burning with potential. I made mistakes. Learned lessons. Grew stronger. And somewhere along the way, the life I was building stopped feeling like a rebellion. It started feeling like a home. A home built not out of anger or revenge, but out of hope. Out of belief. Out of love for the person I was becoming. Looking back now, I don't even see Ethan as the villain of my story. He was just a chapter. A hard one. A painful one. But a necessary one. Because sometimes the people who doubt you the loudest are the ones who teach you just how unstoppable you really are. And when I sat at the head of my first full leadership meeting, the city glittering behind me, the future stretched wide and wild in front of me, I realized something powerful. He hadn't just been wrong about me. He hadn't even known who I was to begin with. But I did now. And that was more than enough. Success didn't make life perfect. It didn't erase every insecurity or turn every day into some inspirational movie montage. There were still bad days, long meetings where everything felt stuck, projects that flopped despite my best efforts, decisions that weighed heavier than I ever expected. But the difference now was that I faced them standing tall. I wasn't tiptoeing through life anymore, scared someone might call me an imposter. I knew who I was. I knew what I had built. And no one could take that from me, not a boss, not a partner, not a memory from a life I had already outgrown. In the months that followed the promotion, my world expanded in ways I hadn't even dared to dream about back when I was sitting on that old couch, heartbroken and terrified after Ethan left. I was invited to speak on panels, asked to mentor younger women starting their careers, quoted in articles about leadership and innovation. People treated me like I was someone worth listening to. But even more important than the recognition from strangers was the recognition from myself. I stopped waiting for permission to want more. I stopped apologizing for being ambitious. I stopped shrinking to make other people comfortable. And in that space, something beautiful grew. New friendships, new passions, new plans. For the first time, I started thinking beyond titles and paychecks. I started dreaming about building something even bigger, something of my own. The idea came slowly, over coffee-fueled brainstorming sessions with friends who believed in me even when I hesitated. A consultancy. A place that didn't just do business but empowered people, especially women, to lead bravely, to build boldly, to stop waiting for validation and start claiming it. It sounded wild at first. Who was I to think I could do something like that? But that was the old voice. The ghost voice. And I wasn't living by old rules anymore. So I started planning. Nights spent sketching out business models. Weekends spent building a website, crafting a mission statement, researching grants and networks. It wasn't glamorous. It was messy. Lonely sometimes. Terrifying often. But it was mine. Every step forward was a step further away from the girl who had once needed someone else's permission to believe she could be great. One Friday evening, after locking up the office, I ran into Ethan again. He was leaving too, a little behind me, carrying a worn messenger bag over his shoulder. We hadn't spoken since the awkward elevator ride months before. We might have passed like strangers, just two people moving in different directions. But he slowed down when he caught sight of me. He looked tired. Older somehow. The kind of older that stress carves into you when you're not living the life you thought you would. "Hey," he said awkwardly, falling into step beside me. I glanced at him, waiting. He shifted the bag on his shoulder. "I heard you're starting your own company." I nodded once. "Yeah, I am." He smiled, small, genuine. Not fake. Not smug. Just a man who had finally learned how to mean it. "That's really incredible," he said. For the first time, there was no competition in his voice. No bitterness. Just quiet admiration. And for a brief second, I saw the boy I had loved once, the one before the fear, before the resentment, before the insecurities twisted him into someone else. It didn't hurt anymore. It didn't tug at old wounds. It just was. "Thanks," I said simply. He hesitated, then nodded, and with a small wave, turned down a different street and disappeared into the evening. I watched him go, a strange but peaceful feeling settling over me. We were living proof that some chapters close for a reason. Not out of cruelty. Not out of failure. But because they were meant to end. To make room for something better. Something braver. Something real. And as I stood there under the streetlights, the cool air buzzing with possibility, I realized something even bigger. I wasn't just surviving my past anymore. I was building a future so big, so bold, that it didn't even have room for it. I always thought that success would feel like a finish line. Like a confetti cannon would go off. Like the clouds would part and a choir would start singing, announcing that I had finally made it. But the truth, success felt quieter than that. It felt like standing alone in a small office, my office, surrounded by second-hand furniture and blank white walls, staring at the logo I had designed on my laptop at 3 a.m. and realizing, this is real. Launch day wasn't a glamorous, social media perfect moment. There were no flashing lights. No viral announcement. Just a simple email sent to my tiny, carefully built network, introducing the world to Beacon Consulting, a name that felt right from the start. Because that's what I wanted to be for others. A beacon. A light for people finding their way through the same storms I had once fought through. The first client came in slow, a referral from a friend who had believed in me when this was still just scribbles in a notebook. The second came a few weeks later, a small, struggling nonprofit that needed branding help but couldn't afford the big agencies. I took them both. Treated them like Fortune 500 companies. Poured my heart into their projects. Over-delivered on every promise. Word spread. Not fast but steady. Real. There was a power in building something with your own hands, brick by careful brick. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone, not even to myself. It was about creating something that mattered. Something that was bigger than my past. Bigger than my fears. Some nights sitting alone in that tiny office, eating cold takeout and answering emails until midnight, I thought about the girl I used to be. The girl who let someone else define her. The girl who thought too soft meant too weak. The girl who believed she had to be saved or shaped by someone else in order to become anything at all. And I smiled. Not out of bitterness. Out of pride. Because she had survived. Because she had fought her way here, step by messy, painful, incredible step. And because now she was running her own company. Setting her own rules. Building her own legacy. There were setbacks, of course. Clients who ghosted. Projects that fell apart. Nights when the fear crept back in, whispering, what if you fail? What if you're not really as strong as you think? But I learned something important. Fear doesn't go away when you succeed. You just learn how to live louder than it. You learn how to keep moving even when your knees are shaking. You learn that bravery isn't about not being scared, it's about showing up scared and doing it anyway. 6 months after launch, Beacon Consulting hosted its first workshop. It was small, just a rented room in a community center with a handful of folding chairs and a lopsided banner. But when I stood at the front of that room, looking out at a dozen faces, entrepreneurs, dreamers, builders, I felt something electric spark inside me. This was it. This was what I was meant to do. Not just climb ladders someone else had built. Not just survive places that never really fit me. But create. Lead. Inspire. After the workshop, a woman stayed behind. Mid-30s, nervous energy. She clutched her notebook like it was a life raft. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Of course, I smiled. She hesitated, then blurted out, "How did you do it? How did you become this?" I blinked, caught off guard. No one had ever asked me that so plainly before. I thought about all the answers I could give. The late nights. The failures. The fear. But instead I just said quietly, I stopped believing the people who said I couldn't. She nodded, her eyes shining. And I knew in that moment that maybe I was being exactly what I had always needed. A beacon. Not a perfect one. Not an untouchable, flawless success story. But a real one. Standing tall. Lighting the way. And as I locked up the room that night, the air buzzing with leftover energy and possibility, I realized. This wasn't the finish line. It was just the beginning. A year after Beacon Consulting officially launched, I found myself standing on a stage I never would have dared to dream about before. It was a leadership summit, a real one. Hundreds of people in the audience. Lights, cameras, microphones clipped to my jacket. My name printed on the program next to words like founder, CEO, keynote speaker. If you had told me years ago that this would be my life, I would have laughed, bitter and disbelieving. Because back then, I couldn't even imagine a life that wasn't tethered to someone else's approval. And now the only approval I needed was my own. I stood backstage for a moment before they called me out, hand resting lightly against the heavy curtain, feeling the buzz of nerves and excitement twist together in my chest. And then I stepped forward. The applause was loud, but it wasn't deafening. It wasn't the applause that mattered. It was the fact that I had walked out there fully, completely myself. No pretending. No shrinking. No asking permission. I took the microphone, smiled at the crowd, and told my story. Not the sanitized version. The real one. About heartbreak. About doubt. About the long, hard climb out of a life that had once felt too small to breathe inside. About building something when everyone, including the voices in your own head, said you couldn't. I told them about fear. About failure. About forging forward anyway. Because that was the truth nobody tells you when they hand you glossy success stories. You don't get here by being fearless. You get here by being terrified and doing it anyway. After the speech, people lined up to talk to me, to shake my hand, to say thank you, to tell me their own stories in rushed, hopeful voices. I listened. I hugged. I promised them what I had promised myself long ago. That they were already enough. That they didn't have to earn it by being perfect or unbreakable. That surviving was already proof of their strength. Later, as the event wound down, I found a quiet corner of the lobby, away from the buzz. Just me, my aching feet, and a cup of lukewarm coffee. That's when I saw him. Ethan. I almost didn't recognize him at first. He wasn't part of the event, just walking through, wearing a visitor's badge from another conference being held on the other side of the center. He spotted me before I could look away. There was a beat of frozen, electric silence between us. And then he gave me a small nod. No smirk. No bitterness. Just acknowledgement. Recognition. Of what I had become. Of the distance between us now, not just physical, but something deeper, wider, permanent. I nodded back, polite and final. There was nothing else to say. No need for dramatic closures. No need for final conversations. I didn't owe him my story. He had stopped being part of it long ago. I turned away, smiling softly to myself, and sipped my coffee. And just like that, the past slid back into the past, where it belonged. When I finally left the convention center, the sun was low and golden, the city humming around me. I climbed into my car, tossed my heels into the passenger seat, and let out a breath that felt like it carried every version of myself I had ever fought to become. I thought about the girl sitting alone on that couch after he left. I thought about the woman walking barefoot across her tiny apartment, heartbroken but determined. I thought about the fighter who stayed late at the office, who took the risks, who refused to stay small. I thought about the leader standing on that stage, telling a room full of strangers that they could do it too. They were all me. All of them. Every scar, every setback, every stubborn, messy step forward. And for the first time, I didn't just respect her. I loved her. I loved the life I had built. Not in spite of everything that happened. Because of it. The future stretched wide and wild in front of me. Not perfect. Not predictable. But mine. Fully, fiercely mine. And as I pulled onto the road, the city lights blurring into streaks of hope and possibility around me, I knew one thing with absolute, unshakable certainty. I had never needed him to become anything. I had always been everything I needed. I just had to believe it. And now, I did.